Hello again. The thumbnail to this video shows a character familiar to us all these days, John Blank, the Black Trumpeter who was employed by Henry VIII. This image has become the leitmotif of an alternative history in which Tudor England had among its population many black people of sub-Saharan African heritage. This is, of course, a relatively new idea, one which was, as you might say, conjured out of thin air 8 years ago with the publication of this book, Black Tudors by Miranda Kaufman. The title is dishonest and misleading, horribly so. But before I explain why, let's just ask ourselves what we mean by Black Tudors. The Tudor period is that time in English and Welsh history between 1485 and 1603, when the eponymous dynasty held sway in those countries. It is limited to that time and that place. We cannot really talk of Tudor Japan or Tudor India or Tudor Rome. We are restricted to the geographical confines of England and Wales and the temporal limits of the late 15th to the very early 17th centuries. What about black? Well, of course, there were at that time black people in Australia, the aboriginal inhabitants of that continent, but there were none in Tudor England. Black in this context simply means men and women of sub-Saharan African ancestry. Having got this clear in our minds, let's examine this source book on the subject and see to what extent it can even be said to be about Black Tudors, which is why I said that the title is misleading and dishonest. Let's start with the illustrations, of which there are 19. Right, first of all, very simple. You can see John Blank illustrated in top 2 there. He definitely did live for a while in Tudor England. Beneath that, we've got African musicians who were present at courts across Europe. This group appears in Lisbon. No, not Tudor. Here's the next lot. A black trumpeter performs in this French tapestry. French? No, that's not Tudor. German artist Christoph Weiditz. Observe this African drummer play. No, Germany. That's not Tudor. This portrait of an anonymous member of the Habsburg court of Margaret of Austria. No, not Tudor. Here's the next lot of illustrations. I wonder if anybody can see what's wrong with the illustrations here in the book called Black Tudors. An African groom holds the Queen's horse in this 1617 portrait of James I's wife, not Tudor. By the time Charles I and Henrietta Maria are depicted embarking on a hunting expedition in the early 1630s, the African groom, no, not Tudor. Next lot of illustrations. This one is the Master of the Mary Rose. That does involve a black Tudor. Africans diving for pearls by the Caribbean island of Margarita. No, not Tudor. Then there's some stuff here about Francis Drake, which doesn't tell us anything about black people in Tudor England. Maroon communities of Africans who had escaped Spanish captivity. Here a maroon leader in Ecuador. No, not Tudor. Here's some maps of Francis Drake's voyages in the West Indies and Africa, not Tudor. Aha, next one. Edward Swallow, one of several Africans serving in Tudor gentry households. Yes. Definitely black Tudor. An African child appears in the centre foreground of this image of a village festival by Marcus Gerardt the Elder. Flemish, not Tudor. And finally we have painted in 1580s Bologna. No, not Tudor. Mary Phyllis's countryman Abdul al-Wahid bin Masad is an Arab leading an exit from Morocco, not Tudor or black. Interesting, no? 19 illustrations, and hardly any of them are anything at all to do with Black Tudors. The structure of the book itself It's divided into 10 chapters, each of which tells the story of a supposed Black Tudor, although these are padded out with an awful lot of material which has nothing to do with either Tudors or black people. The first chapter is about John Blank, came to England in the early 16th century, stayed for 6 or 7 years and then left. Yes, a genuine Black Tudor. Second chapter, Jacques Francis, a black diver with a Venetian salvage company who was in England for a few years in the 1540s. Yes, Black Tudor. A man called Diego who sailed with Francis Drake. He was black, lived in Tudor England for 4 years. So far, this is 3 foreigners who visited and lived in England for a few years each. Then there is a mention of a porter about whom little is known and a silk weaver who was possibly but not certainly black. We'll stretch a point on him and we'll say that we have now learnt about 5 Black Tudors. Then we run into difficulties. The next chapter is about a woman called Mary Phyllis, who was a Moroccan convert to Christianity. Tudor, yes, but black no. She was either Berber or Arab. The next chapter is about a black African who visited England in the 17th century, so not a Tudor. Then comes a man called John Anthony, who was black and lived in Dover for a while in the 17th century. Not a Tudor either. Anne Cobbis, neither black African nor Tudor, lived in London in the 17th century. And then we have Catalina of Almondsbury, who lived in England also in the 17th century. You see the problem here. This is a meticulously researched and informative book, but the author has only been able to come up with 5 black people, each of whom lived in Tudor England for a few years. This is the sum total of Black Tudors. Just 5. There may of course have been others, but if so, then it's surprising that Miranda Kaufman doesn't mention them, and that half the people she described in this book were either not black or didn't live in the Tudor period. This then is the myth of black people in Tudor England, and the next time that you watch a television drama set in this time and see black people scattered about all over the place, you will know that the only evidence for the idea is this, which was, after a great deal of work and exhaustive research, only able to cite just 5 men who each spent a few years in this country. I think it fair to say that unless somebody produces more evidence, we can safely assume that the idea of Black Tudors is pretty much of a nonsense, that there may have been half a dozen or so, but probably not all that many more.